reason did not make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat. Person forgot, person fell asleep, they were partying at the Azad, they only came out in the morning, I don't know what it is. And the question is, so you didn't make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat. We learned last week that there are conditions, if one would say, for example, one could still perform Melacha, but nonetheless one shouldn't really be eating until after you've made Havdalah. What if you missed Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat? So says the Gemara here, source number 45. Amri b'nei Rabbi Kenigsberg. Somebody who does not make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat can be mavdil, can make Havdalah the whole week. Okay, interesting. Ad kama. So what does it mean here when it says the whole week, like the rest of the week, maybe we would say? Rabbi Zera, ad Revi'i b'Shabbat. This is until Yom Revi'i, till Wednesday. Okay, the ad over here, by the way, is ad v'lo ad b'chla, meaning until once it's Wednesday, you can no longer make Havdalah, until Tuesday. Yad yativ Rabbi Zera kamed Rabasi, v'amnei Rabasi kamed Rabbi Yochanan. Yativ v'kama l'inyan gitin chada b'shabta treu plata b'tal shabta. In other words, they're saying our halakha when it comes to writing documents, but the point is this, that when we say Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, that is considered the first 3 days of the week, that is considered to be after Shabbat. By the time we get to Yom Revi'i, it's colloquially known as Wednesday, that is considered before Shabbat, as part of the next week, right? There's always this kind of dichotomy, Shabbat the end of the week or the beginning of the week. The answer is that it's both. Now, we have seen this before. I think when we began with Hilchot Shabbat, we saw that there is significance to Yom Revi'i in terms of preparation for Shabbat that is upcoming, right? That is why in Shirsha Yom to Yom Revi'i, we actually say L'chuna Ranana. We say that there's a psukim from Kabbalat Shabbat. Already, that is the time that we start to prepare, have to take into account the fact that Shabbat is upcoming. So, for example, therefore, one cannot go on a ship. Right, one cannot embark on a ship that is once it's Wednesday, Yom Revi'i, one has to be careful in terms of going on. If it's for the Varashut, etc., that's the halakha at the beginning of Hilchot Shabbat. Part of the reason is a number of explanations which are given over there, but part of the reason is that once we're within 3 days of Shabbat, we're worried you might be on the ship and somebody will have to be Machalel Shabbat for you. Once you're there, it's Pikuach Nefesh. But already you have a responsibility to think about that, not to put yourself in that situation. If it's on Sunday, we say, okay, Sunday, it's the beginning of the week. You don't yet need to worry. You don't yet need to be concerned about Shabbat that is upcoming, right? But from Wednesday, you do. So in other words, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, the first 3 days of the week are still considered after Shabbat. It's still after the previous Shabbat. And therefore, Havdalah could still be said within this time period if one needed to. Obviously, all of this we're dealing with in extenuating circumstance. It's not the ideal. You should make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat. You should make it as soon as you can on Motzei Shabbat. But if you can't, we mentioned last week as well the case of Tisha B'Av, which is where we always we would have to make Havdalah the following day. Okay, but says the Gemara, the last line, Amar Yaakov Bari, but you would not say the bracha over fire. The bracha over fire, we'll see later on that the same is true regarding Samim. But regarding Borei Marayah, that is a specific bracha for Motzei Shabbat, and therefore, if one is making Havdalah after Motzei Shabbat, so it would just include the brachot of Borei Pragafen and Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'chol. Now Rashi here on the Gemara says, Ad Revi'i Shabbat, Avam Revi'i Ulahalan Gabei Shabbat Haba Mitchashev, right? From Wednesday onwards, that's considered part of the next day. It's considered before the following Shabbat. As we said here, Ad Revi'i means Ad V'lo Ad B'Shvat. And then the Gemara again later on says a similar idea. Source number 47, top of page 183. If somebody did not make Kiddush on Friday night, as we've discussed, you would have to make the Friday night Kiddush the following day. You'd have to say it on Shabbat, and Motzei Shabbat. Right, so somebody who did not make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat would then have to go and make Havdalah throughout the week. Shabbat here in this context means week, not on Shabbat. Because maybe it's Friday. What? Well, it's Friday. Right, well, so that's what the Gemara said before. The truth is that earlier, the Gemara did say, the language was the Kol Shabbat Kulo. Seems to be, it's kind of, I guess, the language of Kuzma, language of, it's exaggerated. It says Kol Shabbat Kulo, because there it said, explicitly, Ad Kama, he said Ad Revi'i b'Shabbat. So although here it doesn't have that qualification, but we understand from the Gemara previously. Now, sorry. So we said that when it comes to Kiddush V'Achulu, again, it's specific for Friday night, but it's the bracha in terms of Makadesh Shabbat. That is what you would have to say the next day. Now, there seem to be somewhat different Gilsaot here of the Gemara. Rashi, as we saw, had our version of the text which said until Wednesday. Now the Rif is a little bit more stringent than that. He says, you'll see number 48. He says, Maskana Marav Elchtatam Makadesh Baldumi Shelo Evdil B'Motzei Shabbat Mavdil V'Olech Kol Hayom Kulo. Seemingly the Rif had a different version of the text. Our version says Olech Kol Shabbat Kulo. His version seems to have said Kol Hayom Kulo. In other words, the Havdalah would only apply on Sunday, on the first day. Right, the Bahag, in source number 49, is even more stringent. He says if somebody went and ate before Havdalah, you're not allowed to eat before Havdalah. But if you did, you sort of uprooted your ability to make Havdalah after that, and then you cannot make it the next day. So let's just see the summary of this over the page in source number 50, which is the Shulchan Aruch. And he says, Shachach v'lo evdil b'motzei Shabbat, navdil ad sof yom shlishi. Okay, that's the first opinion. That's what we saw. That is Rashi, and that is our Gemara. One forgot to make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat, or as I've said, again, the most relevant case that I can think of, aside the case of Tisha B'Av, is the case of Chayalim, right, where conceivably one would not be able to make Havdalah. And therefore you can carry on until Tuesday. I'll just say, obviously in the case of Chayalim, if they're unable to make Havdalah, but they need to eat in order to keep up their fitness and readiness for the battle, so obviously that would be permitted.
The assumption being that in a normal case, someone who hasn't had Havdalah would not eat until Tuesday?
Well, that's what, yeah. So that's another reason why you shouldn't wait until Tuesday. I mean, the truth is, as we've seen, there is an opinion, the Bahag, who says that if you ate, well, then you've now lost the ability to make Havdalah later. Others would argue. But in any event, so that is the Shulchan Aruch. He says you can make Havdalah until Tuesday. Now, Yesh Omrim She'eino Mavdil, there are those who say, no, what are you talking about until Tuesday? You've got until Sunday. By the way, this idea of Shabbat carrying on until Tuesday, etc. So a similar discussion comes up regarding Shnai Mikav Echat Targum. Shnai Mikav Echat Targum, which a person has to complete the parasha, has to be, the language of the Gemara is, Yashlim Parashatav Imat Tzibur, which means you have to go through the parasha with the Tzibur being that Shabbat. If you didn't make it by the end of Shabbat, there are those who say you can finish it on Motzei Shabbat. Those say you didn't make it, good, you'll catch up later in the week. Catch up by Tuesday because that still belongs to the previous Shabbat. You can catch up that, you've gone to Shmini Atzeret. Okay, but in any event. Now, the Dafka Borei Bragafen, V'Mavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol, he said it's only those two brachot one would say. Aval ala Ner B'Samim Eino Mevarech Elav Motzei Shabbat. Ner and B'Samim you only say on Motzei Shabbat. By the way, something else that we learn from this is that these brachot, yes, they are part of the Seder Havdalah, but you notice they are not necessarily intrinsic to Havdalah itself. Meaning, if for whatever reason a person heard Havdalah and Motzei Shabbat but missed out one or more of these brachot, so long as you have the bracha of Hamaftil Ben Kodesh L'Chol, you fulfilled your obligation. Yesh min shomer da'ad kai malan tam avdil hanei mile echad hivdil b'leil Motzei Shabbat. Right, so the language of the Gemara was, even if you've eaten, you can still go and say Havdalah. There is an opinion, this is Bahag, says that only applies on Motzei Shabbat. Aval im lo hivdil b'leila v'enche ta'am shuvein on mavdil. There are those who say that if you have not, that if you ate and you had not made Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat, well, now you've eaten, now you can no longer go back and say Havdalah. Okay, so those are the different opinions. The Shulchan Aruch lists them. But the primary opinion tells us the Ramah was a Kakis Farah Rishonah. The first view, which is that you have until Tuesday. Now, the Ramah, you can see, is more definitive about it. The Shulchan Aruch is maybe somewhat less definitive about it because he brings different opinions. And therefore, the Ben Ish Chai says like this. The Ben Ish Chai was Swahili Posek in Baghdad, says in source number 51, says, Ne'enas v'lo yevdil b'leil Motzei Shabbat, for a reason, circumstances which were in one's control, not in one's control, but you did not say Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat. Yesh lo zman Havdalah b'sof yom shlishi, v'lo yevarech ela b'rei pragafen alayinu b'kat hamavdil. Okay, you could say Havdalah until Tuesday. Again, it would only be those two brachot of b'rei pragafen and hamavdil. Miu, because I'm Abdel Yamar Bli Shem Malchut Mishum Deika Plukta Bazeh. Says the Ben Ish Chai, we are concerned, and now we see that generally speaking, the Sephardi poskim are more concerned for the principle of what's known as Sabbath, Safek Brachot La'akeh, right? Since there is a major machloket rishonim here as to whether the bracha can still be said, says the Ben Ish Chai, if you're saying Abdullah later on, you would not actually say Shem Malchut in the bracha of Hamavdil. The Ashkenazi poskim seem to be a bit more relaxed about this. You can see the I know it's a bit of an oxymoron what I just said, but you can see that in Salt number 52, the Shmirat Shabbat Kelchada, he says, Lo yavdil b'motzei Shabbat, ben b'shogeg ben mezid, yavdil miyad k'sheniskar. Person did not make Abdallah, again, shogeg mezid, on motzei Shabbat, do it when you remember, ben b'layla ben b'yom, right, whether it's day or night, at this point is not, is immaterial. Umavdil ad sof yom shlishi, till the end of Tuesday. What's the end of Tuesday? At shkiat hakama, simple shkia. But you would not say the bracha of Samim Oner except on Motzei Shabbat. Okay, no mention here that one would have to say omit to Shem Malchut. You would say the bracha of Hamavdil as a regular, it would seem. And regarding spices, so Beit Yosef Aviyah in Sort number 53, he says, Lamar Rabbeinu L'Psamim, Mikol Sheken, שהרי אינם אלא להשיב הנפש שדואגת על יציאת שבת ולא שייך אלא סמוך ליציאתו. ושמים are there to give us comfort to the neshama yitera which is leaving on Motzei Shabbat. You're making Abdullah on Sunday, Monday, you've missed the boat already. You can forget about the spices. That's not necessary at that point. Okay, that is the end of last week's shir, or 2 weeks ago shir, Motzei Shabbat and Havdalah number 1. Let's now move on to the second shir in the book. So this is shir number 5. We are skipping to page 199. On page 199, see that there is a question regarding the order of Havdalah, the order of the brachot that we say. As I mentioned before, an ordinary Motzei Shabbat, we have the 4 brachot of Havdalah, right? We have Boit Ragefen, we have Boit Menei B'Samim, we have Boit Menei Esh, and we have Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'Chol. Where it gets very complicated is when you have the confluence of Shabbat and Yom Tov, or Motzei Shabbat and Yom Tov, or Shabbat and Motzei Yom Tov, etc. And that is where the Gemara discusses the idea of Yakna has, where you add in additional brachot. We have the bracha of Havdalah, we have the bracha of Zman, we have the bracha, etc., of Kiddush, etc. But without that, generally speaking, it is pretty straightforward. Although there is a machloket in the Gemara between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel as to precisely what the order is. Okay, you can see that we won't go through it now, the Gemara, but you can see the Gemara there in source on page 199. It goes through as a bit of a discussion where, right, does the bracha of wine come first? Does the bracha of the day come first? There is a discussion between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. But the established halacha, you can see in the Shulchan Aruch, we are now in source number 2. Again, the numbers have reset because we're in a new share according to the division in the book. But source number 2 on page 200. Seder Havdalah, Yain, Samim, Ner, Havdalah. Okay. Simanech, Yavne, Baneh, however you want to say it. Tzarich lezaher shelo yeh hakos pagum. Okay, another halacha we need to know that the kos should not be pagum. This is it should not have a defective cup. Whenever we have a kos shel bracha, right? So there are certain halachot relating to it. It should need to be washed out beforehand. It needs to be full. It cannot have been drunk from before you make the bracha. That's considered a kos pagum. That's why I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again on Seder night. So we have, when we dip out, we pour out, or we dip our fingers and pour the wine or the grape juice, whatever you have at the 10 plagues, right? And then at the end it says in the Haggadah, now go back and refill the cup. Everybody's like, oh, we have to refill the cup because we've had so much. How much is missing? No, it's not to do with the fact that you don't have enough wine, even though you spilled out a tiny amount. When you stick your finger into a cup, that makes the cup considered a kos pagum in that sense, and therefore it's therefore you'd have to refill it. But refilling it gives it back that status again of a kos shel bracha, which is not defective, so to speak. Generally speaking, the cup for Havdalah, so at home you'll just pour the cup for Havdalah. Here in Shul, for example, we have at Sudah Shlishit, where we will say Birkat Hamazon over a kos shel bracha. That is the one case though where you would, person benching would hold the cup, but would not drink from the wine. right? And we keep that cup for Havdalah. So one has to be careful to make sure that cup is.
Doesn't make a bracha on Arida then. Even if I got on Arida.
No. You make the Hagafen on Havdalah. Right. So it came up once. Sometimes people don't know. And sometimes people would say the bracha. So normally you got somebody sitting next to him and they're very, very quick, and you're about to say bracha. No, stop, right? But what happens if you missed it? So what happens if a person already said the bracha? It's a case which comes up sometimes. So if the person already said the bracha, at that point he should drink, because we discussed last week all the idea of why we can't drink before Havdalah, etc. But once a person said the bracha, break right up then. So if you don't drink, it's now bracha levatala. So in that case, take a small sip. But now you have a kos pador. So then you can refill the cup, and that's how we would fulfill this. Okay, so those are the brachot. Now the Rama adds in na'agu lomar kodem havdalah shosim b'bayit hinei kelishuati etc. Kos yeshuat asa ve'edim hayta ora b'simcha. To say last night it was very, I'm sure many people was very, very moving. Saying these psukim of salvation. Ve'edim hayta ora b'simcha after the wonderful news that we received yesterday, together with the tragedy and the sadness of the soldier who was killed in the operation. But nonetheless, so these are the psukim which are added on before. Again, these are not intrinsic. This is the minhag, but these are not intrinsic to the Havdalah. On Yom Tov, we don't say those psukim, etc. So if one said the brachot in the wrong order, also, b'di'evet, that is okay. That is not na'akev. Why would you say the brachot in the wrong order? Maybe a person didn't have a candle, didn't have spices. You would say without it. What happens if you started, right? The spices hadn't arrived yet on time, and you started saying Havdalah. So you said the other brachot, and then suddenly the spices come. Okay, so then you'll say it. It says the Piskei Teshuvot, number 3.
Sophisticated. Just what if you get mixed up?
What's that?
So sophisticated explanation. What if you just get mixed up?
Oh, you get mixed up. Right? It is not. It's not invalidated. Even if you said it in the wrong order, you've still fulfilled your obligation. So yeah, we get into a very complex sugya in the Chot Brachos, but where essentially it's not just what you say, but it's also about what you had intention to say. My Brachot has a whole discussion. If a person said Baruch Atah Hashem, and a person had before them a cup, and they weren't sure if it's a cup of wine or a cup of beer, and therefore it's different Brachot. So it goes by what I had in mind at the time that I said Hashem's name. That's going to be very significant. So here, what's the case? Is the person said Baruch Atah Hashem, Al Menat L'Sayem Borei Morei Ha'esh. I had the intent to finish to say the Bracha Borei Morei Ha'esh. But even though I wasn't actually meant to, I was meant to say Borei Morei Ha'esh, but I just forgot. I got confused. And then I remember. Okay, so now this is what if you only remember once you've already said the bracha, you're home free. But you remember halfway through, that's the worst. Okay, now what do I do? Do I carry on what I had intention to say, or do I change and say the bracha that I meant to say? Now, if it's a case where one of the brachot is going to be invalid, so that would be then we would have to change or do something else. But yeah, the case is right. So again, you're meant to say Borei Minei B'Samim. That's where you're up to in Havdalah. But you forgot, and you thought you were meant to say Borei Morei Ha'esh. So you say Baruch Atah Hashem. Oops, right? That's when you remember. So there says the Piskei Teshuvot. Nonetheless, finish the bracha you started saying. Finish saying Borei Morei Ha'esh. And get the benefit from the candle. And then say the bracha on the B'Samim. Now it says if you've already finished the bracha, by now you realize. Don't now talk dibur, start to correct the bracha. No, you said the bracha, get the benefit from the ner. Even if you then change it, it's too late. Don't do that. Because again, we go by what your intent was when you started saying the bracha. So bottom line is, you said the brachot in the wrong order. That is okay. Let's talk a little bit about the drink. Is he
suggesting that the end doesn't matter? That if you remember and you think you still have to go, you made the other bracha?
No, he's saying that the bracha that you did make. He's saying if you said the bracha. But that's the second case. That's the case where you finish saying the bracha b'reim ha'esh,
Right.
and then as soon as you finish saying it, you said b'reim ha'esh. That's the situation. Okay. Let's turn over the page 202. Okay, in terms of drinks used other than wine, we discussed when we learned about Echot Kiddush, what happens if a person doesn't have wine or a person doesn't like wine. We saw different opinions in the Rishonim, and we saw the bottom line that on Friday night, when one does not have any wine available, one would make Kiddush over Challah. Right? On Shabbat morning, that was not the case. On Shabbat morning, we said if one does not have wine, then one could use another beverage, Chema Medina. And the reason is because there's nothing recognizable in terms of the fact that I make Kiddush over at night. Kiddush has its own specific bracha, and therefore I can still say the Kiddush over the Challah. But in the morning, where all the Kiddush is Brei Pragav, so if I'm just saying a Motzilech in Aretz, but be saying anyway, there it would be preferable to use a different beverage, Chema Medina. But now the problem is it's not so clear exactly what Chema Medina is. We'll see a number of opinions over here. There are opinions that nowadays, the Rosh Hashanah, for example, holds that nowadays there's no such thing as Chema Medina. In our present reality, there is no beverage which fulfills this criteria. But we'll see other opinions as well. The Gemara says over here, we learned this Gemara when we learned Hilchot Kiddush, but let us see it again in the context of Havdalah. So again, this is from our Rabbi Pesachim, all the dinim of Kiddush and Havdalah and Kiddush Makom Suda, etc. concentrated in that chapter. So say all the dinim, but many of them discussed them. And the Gemara says like this: Amri lei Mar Yanuka Mar Kashisha Braid Rab Chisda Rab Ashi. So the sons of Rab Chisda, one of them was called Mar Yanuka, which means young Mar, and one of them was called Mar Kashisha, which means the older. Not sure if that was actually their names or that was their nickname, but in any event, that's how they were known. So they say to Rab Ashi, Zimna Chada Ikla Meimar Latra. It happened once. The great sage Meimar was with us for Shabbos. We didn't have wine. Again, all these questions in our present reality, 99% of the time, there's no difficulty to have wine or have grape juice. Like I say, Chayalim or whatever it is, there are extenuating circumstances. But these cases are far less common than they were once upon a time. Aitina le shitra. So we gave him beer. We gave him beer in order to make up the law. And he wouldn't make up the law. Ubatavat, he wouldn't eat either because he hadn't made up the law. Lemachar. Okay, we saw this is not going to cut it for a man. He wants wine. Okay, he holds like a Rosh Hashanah. He does not have a Medina. So he went and we gave him wine. And then he made Havdalah on Sunday, right? And he drank. In the next year, right, he was the scholar in residence again, a year later. And lo avanan chamra. And again, we didn't have wine. And we gave him beer. So what do you think is going to happen? The same thing's going to happen. No, you've already learned the Gemara. You know it's not the same thing. Amar, he said, okay, this has happened again. You don't have wine in this place. It's not your, right? You serve beer. Okay, if that's the case, this is the Chema Medina. This is the wine of the province. This is the sort of significant drink with which you use to honor your guests. And that's okay. If that's the case, it fulfills now I know it fulfills the criteria. And therefore he made Havdalah and he tasted some food. So what you see from this Gemara as well is that Chema Medina is very much dependent on the time and the place. It's dependent on the societal context. Because Amema originally thought that it wasn't Chema Medina. Where he came from, seemingly it wasn't. Seemingly they had wine. But over here they would use beer instead of wine, and therefore it's okay. Now,
he could have asked. Instead of waiting a whole year.
Okay. Say again?
Because there's so much wine, you don't need anything else, and nothing else counts anyway.
I don't remember. I have to look it up. I'm not sure exactly, but I do just remember. That's his bottom line. Yeah. I have to look that up. I'm not sure. In any event, now Tosfot points out, source number 5, why there is a significant difference between Kiddush and Havdalah in the Shagor. Because as we said, by Kiddush, on Friday night, right, which is the main Kiddush in the Doraita, if you don't have wine, so it's preferable to use bread before you start looking around for Chena Medina. By Havdalah, we don't say that. And he says, the Ikatama, the Kevan Shemitzvah is Od Sudat Shabbat, Shayach Kiddush Alapat. When it comes to Kiddush, we have Kiddush with Makom Suda. Kiddush is intrinsically connected to your Shabbat meal. and therefore it makes sense that you could have kiddush over bread, over part of the meal. Aval Havdalah, what's Havdalah got to do with bread? Right? There's no meal at Havdalah. It's a specific ceremony that we do. And Adav Kala Yain, connected to wine, the Shayach, the whole Davar, Hoda'ah, V'shira. And that's connected to wine, which is relevant to matters of thanks and so on. Where this comes up as well, where we see this confusion a little bit, is now if I say the Beit Agape over the wine of Havdalah, what happens if I then have wine afterwards, which I want to drink? Is that covered? Is that part of the soda? On Sukkot, for example, this comes up. Let's say Shabbat Chol HaMoed of Sukkot, right? So we would go and we make Havdalah in the Sukkah because you're going to drink wine, right? So then, do you make a Leishet Sukkah when you've made Havdalah? It's not so clear. On the one hand, you're having the wine in the Sukkah because that's part of the Sukkah. That's part of your Yeshiva B'Sukkah. On the other hand, you're not sitting down having a meal. You're just having the wine and you're going out. So the poskim say the best thing to do is I want you to have Havdalah and then once you sit in the Sukkah for a little bit, have something to eat and be able to make a bracha without any pickpocket. Okay, so Shulchan Aruch source number 6. Ein mavdilin ala pat. We don't make Havdalah over bread. This is where you don't have one. Aval ala shecha mavdilin imuchem medina. Right? If beer or another beverage which satisfies the criteria of Chema Medina, okay, it's never going to be water. Everybody agrees on that water is not, you're never making Havdalah on water. Says the Rama, Tov yoter lavdil al kos pagum shel yayin me'al shecha. We saw the Rama before discussed about a kos pagum. Said if that's your choice, you have a cup which is pagum for whatever reason of wine versus beer, better to use the wine. ונהגו להבדיל במוצאי שבת על שיכה ולא יין משום דחביב עליו. There was a practice that on Motzei Pesach they would make Havdalah over beer rather than over wine because it is chaviv, it's precious to a person, right? Because for 8 days, in the last case, you haven't been able to drink beer. Again, you ask at what point, when do they go? When do they buy back from the goy? But in any event, that is a custom which he brings. The Biur Halacha says over here, he says this would apply the whole year round if beer is more chaviv to you drinking than wine. We saw there are opinions in the Rishonim that said that if there's another drink which is more chaviv to you than wine, or if the bread is more chaviv to you than the wine, you can make kiddush over that. We don't pass it that way. But he says there is an opinion that the same would apply with these drinks. Now, Shmat Shabbat Chata brings in the name of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. He says, "Mikol makom efshar delo dami lemotzei Pesach, shezeh chaviv l'rabim mipnei ha'ishtanut me'isod heter." He said, "No, that which you say that it's more chaviv, that is, first of all, it's an objective standard rather than a subjective standard. We're now going to say every person is going to decide what they're going to make Havdalah on. No." And he says, "Why is it more chaviv? Because of motzei Pesach, because everybody's been waiting for a week to be able to drink it, and therefore it's that." But in another time, Who says one is more chaviv than the other, and therefore lekatchila you should still use your wine. Now, Shut Or Letzion, Rabbi Tzion Abashor, he actually says no lekatchila. You could use Chema Medina if you prefer it. He says at the top of page 204, right? The Havdalah, efshar lavdil lekatchila or Chema Medina, afilo miyashayin matzoi. Even if there is wine, you can use Chema Medina. Right? V'chen mashma midvrei Shulchan Aruch. שסתם שאפשר להבדיל לשכחה, ולא כתב שזהו דווקא במקום שאין היין מצוי. He learned from the fact that it says there is that it's he doesn't say, the Shulchan Aruch does not specify where there is no wine. He just says Chema Medina. Okay, now what is Chema Medina? What beverage would satisfy this criteria? So there are a number of different opinions based on this. One opinion is that only in a place where what the words themselves imply. Chama Medina. Chama means wine. So the wine of the province, meaning in a place where there is no wine, where it is not readily available, you have a different drink instead. Again, and that is something which nowadays I think would be very, very hard pressed to apply. Says the Rashbam, Chama Medina, Ein Yain Acher B'Yazot, Yim Shechar Kaf Mavdilin Bo. That is what related to that story by Ameima. So there is no wine in this place. They don't have it. If there's, one rich person somewhere has got a bottle for, 10,000 shekels or whatever, that doesn't count. Right? You have Yeah, this is the beverage which is used
His
instead.
language is interesting because in yain acher ki'u, like it's almost like nechshav as if this is a type of yain also. Like he kind of puts them together.
Right. I mean, the Gemara uses the same word.
Right.
So the question is, and again, this is something the Rishonim are going to argue about. How far does the similarity have to extend?
Hmm.
And we might say that yain acher has to be another alcoholic beverage. Obviously, there is going to be a strong preference in the poskim for an alcoholic beverage versus a non-alcoholic beverage. The two essentially definitions that we have here is either that it's similar to wine. What does it mean that it's similar to wine? So either in the sense that it's also alcoholic, but there's another criteria as well, which is that wine is considered it's considered it's something which you take out, you serve to your guests, it gives a bit of honor to the meal, right? You get invited to somebody's house for Shabbos, you take them a bottle of wine. You don't show up with a bottle of Coke. That's so the question is, would other drinks fulfill that criteria as well? Again, alcoholic or non-alcoholic. So the Rambam now is somewhat more lenient than the Rashbam in his definition. He says, "Medina sherov yenot shecha, afapishu pasul lekidush mutar lavdi alav oel v'chama medina." So he says, in a place where the majority drink, would be beer instead of wine. Doesn't say that the wine is not is not there at all, right? It's prevalent. It's just people maybe prefer the shechar over the yayin. So that could be chema medina. Our whole discussion here was about that. Right. So source number 12, the Mishnah Berurah, he says, Masha Katav, what the Shulchan Aruch wrote, Huadin Lishal Mashkin, Ainu Mashkin, he mentioned Shechar, he said it could be other beverages as well. Mashkin Shal Gilin Ishtoto. These are beverages which you would drink, right, which you would serve to people. Ava Mashkin Shal Gilin, the Pesach, the one May Lachowitz. If it's a drink which you only bring out, it's the kosher for Pesach, whatever, so that doesn't count. In bold now. Even honey water, whatever it is, only in a place where people, this is an ordinary thing which people consume. If it's a place where people don't really drink it, so then it's worse than beer. Vel yain saraf. What about whiskey? Ein kedai lavdir. Now, seemingly, again, if we're talking about a significant drink, something that you honor guests with, whiskey would seem to fulfill, it's alcoholic, right? It would seem to fulfill that criteria more than anything else. But we have another problem here. He says, Ein kedai lavdir. V'katav Magen Avraham, v'kos havdalah ragila mavdir lishtoto kulo. Magen Avraham says, you're meant to drink the entire cup of Havdalah. You don't, unlike with Kiddush, where you can give it to different people. So the general custom is that at least most of the cup is drunk by one person. For most people, if you're going to have your cup of whiskey, even if it's not a shir chazon, it's going to be difficult to consume the whole thing. If you have nothing else, then make up on it. He said at least, but make sure you drink a melol lugmav, which is a rov revi'it. If you drink less than that, you have not fulfilled your obligation. And milk or oil, other things, he says these do not people don't normally drink them. Again, you can say in a place where oil, I'm not sure that people drink, but milk, if it's something that people go and you drink a cup of milk. So there's maybe what to discuss over there. The later poskim also ask questions. What about other fruit drinks? Or, we mentioned Coca-Cola before. That's the only thing you have. So maybe there's room to rely on that as Chema Medina. Let's see the Shmirat Shabbat, Keilchata. He says, Ein lo yain lavdi alav, source number 30. Ein lo yain lavdi alav, or shemashke acher chaviv alav min hayain, v'uchem ha'medina, or kedil halan. So you don't have wine, or you have another beverage which you prefer, which is a chama medina, which we'll soon define. Or she'eno yachol lishtot yain shul k'mol l'gmav. You have wine maybe, but you're going to be unable to drink it the requisite amount. If that's the case, so in Kal V'chomer you won't be able to drink the whiskey, but right? There's no one else who fulfill their obligation to drink Havdalah. If you aren't able to drink, health reasons, whatever it is, if there's somebody else who could drink for you, so that would also solve the problem. But that's not the case. As Yavdil Chema Medina, then you can do Havdalah on Chema Medina. דהיינו משקה שבאותו מקום שותים אותו לא מחמת שצריכים לעבוד את הצמאון. So here's the definition. What is Chema Medina? Says the Shema Shabbat. It's another beverage which you don't drink just because you're thirsty, like water, not to quench your thirst. אבל שותים אותו כמשקה חשוב. But you drink it as an important part of the meal. בשביל כבוד הסעודה, in order to honor your meal, וכבוד האורחים, and to honor your guests. That's the definition. So we can argue what fulfills that definition. Notice there he doesn't mention that it has to be alcoholic, but as I say, there are poskim that say it would need to be, at least לכתחילה. לכן, יבדיל במקרים אלה על בירה. Okay, first choice, we would say beer. ואם אין לו בירה, יבדיל על יין צרה. If you don't have beer, so then whiskey. Again, with the caveat that we said, יקפיד למלא כוס המחזיקה הרביעית ולשתות לפחות שיעור כמו רבנת. The cup has to be big enough to hold the רביעית, and you have to drink at least the majority. וכן מבדילין על מיץ תפוח זהב או אשכולית או על יין תפוחים, אם אמנם משקות אלו חשובים במקומו, שותים אותם בשביל כבוד הסעודה, כבוד האורחים. So says the Shema Shabbat, okay, you'll see in footnote number 6, that there are many poskim who reject this. From Zamanoyabach, Moshe, not so happy about it, right, as you can see. Why? Because they'll say fruit drinks that are anything that's majority water is considered water. But says
someone contradicts himself.
Well, this is not Shabbat, this is Ramada.
Yeah, but it's based on his
sometimes yes, sometimes no. I have to look in the footnote then. I have to see exactly what he says. But in any event, he says so that might be another reason why an alcoholic beverage by nature, right? It's hard to, that would not be considered water. That is, and therefore, so he says, but if you don't have wine, you don't have beer, you don't have whiskey, etc. And notice he does prefer whiskey to these other beverages, even though it has those other problems, but it's more likely to fulfill the criteria of Chema Medina. But if you don't have that, he says, then fruit juice would suffice. If these are considered significant beverages in that place. Bishat and Chak, and then one step below that, he says, Yesh lishmoch al mekilim latir al teim mutak wal kafem chalav or bli chalav, ati or coffee. But yesh cholkim or da'atam ein latir al teim mutak wal kafem. But there are those who disagree and also hold that one should not use tea or coffee. Right? Al mayim, al mei soda, al sham mishkot kalim, ein latir af bishat al chak. Okay, so water certainly, interesting, the Shema Shabbat, is even machmer in terms of drink, like fizzy drinks, like Coca-Cola, etc. He includes that along with water. The final halacha, which he says, so there are those who have the practice to use beer even lekatchila rather than wine. Or shayayin kashelem mishkia. Im shayayin kashelem mishkia, v'im shabira chaviva alem. One of these reasons. Yesh lem amal ismo b'vad shabira tia b'makom v'geder chema medina. You can see he's not so enthusiastic about it, but there is what's around. Yeah? Now regarding soft drinks, Coke, Pepsi, etc. So we saw that the Shema Shabbat Kilchata says that is not considered Chema Medina. In Sefer Kvod Bonek Shabbat, the radiance of Shabbat, which Rav Simcha ben Koren, he says in the name of Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg that it could be. Right? He says, when I asked our teacher, Gonov Moshe Feinstein today, when everyone drinks soda at weddings, it's in 1983, it is treated as Chema Medina. I responded, even so, it's not called Chema Medina. Okay, it's an interesting discussion because again, you would say, you go somewhere, you go to whatever it is, you have a fancy drink on the table. That's what people would have, maybe to honor the occasion. Okay, but we see here a difference of opinion in the poskim. Again, maybe the way to look at it is, like I said before, you go to maybe you go to somebody's house and you would present somebody with a bottle of wine or a bottle of whiskey. You would very, very unlikely present them with a can of Coke or even a two-liter bottle. Yeah.
I think the point here is to come up with the picture on the agenda.
Yes.
It's a photo in England. It's basically stuff in which is not there. Not very important to do that because it's a secret prophecy all the time. But it isn't. You can make the choice because this is all fucking brought out because it doesn't have any bits, and it doesn't have any steps. So when you look at the top, you've got to
Definitely. No, that's very interesting. So just say for those on the recording and maybe didn't hear what Jeremy said, he said that Dain Berger gave a psak that one could use Coca-Cola in terms of as Chema Medina, and he said as we said before that this is all dependent on the Medina and it's dependent on the circumstance. And it could be that in America, where Moshe Feinstein was paskening, that Coca-Cola was ubiquitous like water. The truth is, I mean, when I was in England, I remember this. Let's say Coca-Cola, it's quite rare. You go to people for whatever reason, the diet and the zero, and you have whatever. But I think maybe it has a bit of a ma'amad that maybe it's a bit but it's not healthy. So that's why it's a little bit rarer. Maybe.
The nicest things of the posting is setting up a hierarchy. The only question is
Yes.
where do they draw the line?
Yes.
It's like companies just do not make it.
Right. So right. What comes out of this, I mean, the bottom line is we're really dealing with a extenuating circumstance. As we've seen, the only one where we found that there was a minhag of those who said that l'katchila to replace as chema medina instead of wine was beer, and that right we've seen what the poskim have to say about that. But in an extenuating circumstance, so this is the hierarchy. That's what he sets up. First of all, it should be wine. If you don't have wine, then beer. If not that, another alcoholic beverage like whiskey, but you have to make sure you drink enough. Below that, then we start going on to the fruit juice, to the Coca-Cola, etc. Below that would be tea, coffee, milk as well. Now,
But never water.
Never water. That's right. Now, Rav Yosef, just one obvious point as well, which needs to be stated, that if one is making Havdalah on Chema Medina, you would say the bracha of Shehakol rather than the bracha of Weit Raga. Now, Shuti Be'amer, he discusses here relating to tea and coffee. Right, and he somewhat disagrees. Rav Yosef, source number 15, it says, Kafe v'techa shive kamay ba'amar l'inyan zeh. Right, there are those who there is such an opinion. It says, "V'chein b'kodesh chavitei le'alachot ktanot, mash nishal im makachem ha'kafeh, lo mechokma she'en lekadesh ela l'chema medina v'ma v'mishacher dumya v'yayin." There you see it, by the way, that where he says over there, he says that chema medina has to be something which is alcoholic as well. Now, sorry. Okay, so right. Grape juice is a separate discussion routine. Meaning grape juice still has the status of wine.
Right.
So therefore, but if it's not wine, grape juice. If we're judging it as chema medina, then we would have to be according to this idea. Now he says Rav Kirin la'ayin the mide utama ela mishum dabayin and domya de yayin the marva mishacher. Aval kafe v'te she'enan mishachrim lo chashiv chema medina. מן הנמי למי תפוח, תפוחי זהב, וכזה בזה, שכיוון שאין משפרים, אין מטילים עליהם. In other words, anything that's not alcoholic, it does not count, and that would not be chema medina. The other place where this whole discussion comes up, again, is when we have Havdalah during the 9 days, which is what the Shabbat. Right? That is discussed as to what is the best thing to do, because during 9 days we're not meant to drink wine, and therefore there are those there who would say better to do Havdalah on beer or something else. There are those who say no, you're not allowed to drink wine for your own purpose. If we're not sure that it's chema medina, so we're not yet saying Havdalah. So in Manasot, that's what we have to do. The Shulchan Aruch and Mishnah Berurah discusses. There is the question there of whether maybe it would be better to do it with wine, but give a katan to drink. Then the question is, which katan do you give to drink? Because if the katan is too young, so then they don't really understand. So then they're not Yotzei Havdalah. If they're a little bit older and they reach Gil Kinot, so then, well, what are you educating them to drink wine? You're teaching your kid to be your Shabbos Goy, whatever it is. And therefore, you have to find a katan who's old enough to understand, but not old enough to get to, which is a little bit like Schrodinger's cat, right? It's where are you going to find that? But bottom line is, in many places, the minhag is just to use wine or grape juice and do Havdalah normally. Okay, so that is the bracha of Borei Pri Haget. The last thing we'll discuss today, bracha of Borei Minei B'Samim. So all of it is quite a lot in here. But we have something interesting with, as we've said, Borei Minei B'Samim is only said on Motzei Shabbat. It's got to do with the fact that we're losing the Neshamay Teirah and giving it a little bit of comfort from the spices. Okay, now what bracha do you make, or what spices would you use for Borei Minei B'Samim. You see the bottom of page 209, the Mishnah Brachot. It says, Ein v'chin lo ala ner v'lo ala b'samim shel goyim, lo ala ner v'lo ala b'samim shel mitim, lo ala ner v'lo ala b'samim shel avodah zarah. Okay, so certain candles and spices which are used for to pay tribute to the dead, or lahavdil for avodah zarah, that we cannot use. Do you need to have specific spices which are set aside in order for Shabbat, for Abdallah? Gemara source number 19. In that case, those spices there are used to neutralize a bad odor. They're not used for a pleasant fragrance, and therefore we would not take them and we would not say bracha on them. And the Rama even says if you were to use them, you have to go and you'd have to say bracha again. In source number 21 learns from this relating to deodorants and air fresheners, etc. When we say the bracha, it's a spice which are used to give off a good smell, not sometimes there are soaps and things or incense, whatever, that you put in the bathroom to get rid of a bad smell. That would not be appropriate to use. There was a discussion over here somewhere. I remember, I think I saw it before. In terms of if we have to designate specific spices. I think it was here on one of these sources, but I don't see it right now. In any event, the question is, what bracha do we say? This is one of those trivia questions. Very interesting. When I say where you would make one bracha over an object, but a few minutes later you'd make a different bracha over the same object. What is it? So that is regarding the spices. If you're Ashkenazi, regarding the spices for Abdallah. Have a look at page 214, the text of the bracha here in the Rambam, source number 29. We have a number of different brachot over smells.
Right before the Chazon is, I think that's what you're looking for.
Right.
Okay, so what you wonder about in terms of whether or not it's designated for or not or whatever?
Yeah, it may be that. It may be that. I think it's that. Okay. In any way, let's look at the Rambam. So number 29, he says like this. What is the bracha over pleasant fragrance? Eitz or min eitz. So if it's from the tree, a product of a tree, mavarech boreh atzei b'samim. Right? The bracha is who creates a fragrant tree. If esev or min esev, if it was a type of herb, so then you would say boreh asvei b'samim. Now, if it was something else, it wasn't from a tree, it wasn't from the ground, it was a mole, so a mask, which is something which comes from an animal. That's the one which is familiar to us. That's what Ashkenazim say on Shabbat. And there's a separate bracha for the smell of fruit. Right, so you have 4 different brachot related to smell. But borei minei b'samim is a general bracha, but at least you would have fulfilled your obligation. In the same way, if you said shakol on any food, right, it would apply. So you said borei minei b'samim on any food, it would apply as well. Now for the Sfaradim, very often, again, what do we have for spices? If you have spices from spices which come from the ground, or you have leaves of hadasim which come from a tree, etc. So it might be a different bracha. It might be borei asvei b'samim or borei atzei b'samim. But we don't say that. Magen Avraham says, he writes here quoting the Shlai, says Katav Shlam Mishum de'ena kol b'kiyin b'brachot. Not everybody is expert in the laws of brachot. It's going to get very confusing. Tiknu lama borei minei b'samim. Therefore, you don't know. You've got the spices. They come from a tree. They come from a herb. What is it? Everybody knows you say Brahim and Episamim and say Shabbat. That's what's printed in the. Imagine if I had in the Siddur when you print Havdalah, it's like like Alamicha. You have 4 different things. If your spices from here, they say just Bracha, just like that.
It says that you shouldn't say Hakobo Kim Babrachot. He doesn't say they're not the team, but like where did this come from? It's like he's more concerned they don't want to make them. They don't know like what they're making it on.
Yeah. Maybe. So therefore he says Tiknu Lama Brahim Minei B'Samim Ditzal Kol Minim Minkem Motar Avrecha Kol Minim. Therefore he says Mikom Makom right. Therefore you can say the Bracha Brahim Minei B'Samim on everything. So that's the case, right? If you had these leaves and you'd say Brahim Minei B'Samim on them. And if an hour later you had these leaves and you wanted to smell them, so you would say a different bracha because you would say the appropriate one. Now, that is the Ashkenazi practice. Says the Kaf HaChaim in source number 31. Zeo lefi minhag Ashkenaz. Aval minhag b'nei Sfarad gam v'avdalam v'achim lakol min bracha u'yala. The Sfaradim would say whatever the appropriate bracha is. So maybe because the Sfaradim are more makpid and more choshesh about safek brachot, so maybe they're more expert in terms of what the bracha would be, and therefore they would say the correct bracha. Okay, I think and there we have a very nice chart on page 216. You can see the summary of all the different dinim of Havdalah that we've seen. Another fascinating question which comes up, we'll talk about next year. Like I said, I'm not sure there will be one next week, I'll let you know, but maybe only the week after. What about somebody who can't smell? We had, I had in my previous kiddo, somebody who was unable to smell. Can they say the bracha and Havdalah? Or somebody else? Can they say it to themselves? Can they say it to somebody else? How do we do that? We then have, of course, the bracha of Brahim Eish to cover, and we get to Melach Malka and the end of Havdalah, and then we'll get into the introduction to Melachot of Shabbat. Okay, I'd can everybody for coming. Wonderful week.
Hey, just finished. What's up? All right, so I got to put away the computer. I'm coming in.
נו, איזה 300